Welcome to 365 English. Listen to stories easily. We help you learn English happily through various stories. The speed is slow and the pronunciation is clear. The more you listen, the more you will enjoy it. If you like it, please like it, leave a message to chat, and don't forget to subscribe. The dawn of peace in the Middle East, how the 2025 ceasefire reshapes personal destiny and global hope. Part 1. In the early morning of May 3, 2025, the sky over Gaza was unexpectedly quiet. There were no more drones hovering at low altitudes, and no more artillery fire roaring near the mosque. This was a rare moment of tranquility in decades. A ceasefire agreement, like a ray of light before dawn, shone into this land of suffering. This time, the ceasefire is no longer just diplomatic rhetoric, nor is it just a headline in international news. This time, it is truly changing people's destiny. From bullets and flames to silence and prayer, the advent of a ceasefire. At the end of April 2025 in Doha, the capital of Qatar, after 18 hours of closed-door negotiations, Israel and Hamas finally signed a limited ceasefire agreement under pressure from Qatar, Egypt, and the United States. This is not a peace treaty, but it means that the 7-month bloody conflict has finally stopped. Israel suspended airstrikes, Gaza stopped firing rockets, the border buffer zone was redrawn, and the humanitarian corridor was temporarily opened. For many people, this is not just a political event but a dividing line between life and death. I never thought I would see a child fall asleep without crying. These are the words of a father from southern Gaza in a BBC interview. Behind him are devastated neighborhoods, but for the first time there is a little light in his eyes. Turning point of personal destiny, the story of a trapped mother. Lena, 29, is a nurse living in Gaza City. Her husband died in the 2023 conflict, leaving her and 2 young children. The hospital where she worked was bombed in mid-February, after which she moved to Khan Yunis with her children for refuge. The water supply was cut off, food was short, and communications were interrupted. It was once thought that the outside world had forgotten them. On April 30, the UN food truck entered the western part of the city for the first time. She used half a bottle of diesel fuel and rode an electric bike for 30 kilometers to collect food. When she passed by a primary school in the ruins, she found a sign that said, "If there is a ceasefire, we will reopen the class." She burst into tears on the spot. At that moment, she realized that perhaps her children still had a chance to become doctors, not soldiers. Behind the conflict is a generation of educational gaps. The damage caused by war to individuals is never just physical harm. In Gaza, half of the teenagers under the age of 15 have not received normal primary education. Many children can recite the models of fighter planes skillfully, but cannot name the countries on the world map. Peace education, originally just a blueprint on paper of UNESCO, has now become the only key to rebuilding hope. Ben Raven, the principal of a peace school in northern Israel, checked the air raid shelter every day before the ceasefire. In an interview with Israeli media, he said, "I am not teaching Israeli students but future negotiators." After the ceasefire, his school received greeting cards from children in Arab countries, which read, "We hope you are no longer afraid, and we also want to go to school." This is a response without gunpowder, and its impact may be more far-reaching than weapons. Trump's return to the Middle East stage, a double drama of reality and symbolism. In early May 2025, former U.S. President Trump appeared in the Middle East again. This time not for campaigning, but to mediate the hostage exchange plan in his personal name. Some people say he is trying to get headlines, and some say it is a diplomatic gamble. But in any case, he brought the news of the release of 10 hostages. Among these 10 people are retired Israeli teachers and American youth volunteers with dual nationality. When they crossed the border and regained their freedom, spontaneous applause broke out at the scene. A released nurse named Maya said, "I thought no one would come to us again. Thank you for not giving up," Trump said at the press conference. "I'm not here to be a hero, I'm just here to prove that dialogue is more useful than bombs." Whether it's ironic or controversial, this sentence seems extremely powerful at this moment. 5. The signal behind the hostage exchange. Hostility can be discussed in the past. Any discussion about releasing hostages would be quickly rejected by all parties. But in 2025, there was a sound of a break in this deadlock. The driving force behind it is not just politicians, but more from the continued voices of the hostages' families. They camped in Tel Aviv for nearly 100 days, constantly putting pressure on the media, the government, and the United Nations. Many families lost their source of income, and some sold their properties to print leaflets and advertise. It is these actions that make the negotiations impossible to ignore. Ahmed Sharif, the Joint mediation representative, said in an interview, "It's not that we are smart, but that people finally believe that even the most difficult hatred can be discussed." The rise of peace education, from the classroom to post-disaster life. In the calm brought by the ceasefire, a new project that has attracted widespread attention has quietly started. The co-learning program, led by the United Nations, has opened online courses in Israel and Gaza refugee camps for the first time. Participating children do not need to reveal their identities. They only need an internet access point to hear the stories, history, and wishes told by the other side. The course does not talk about religion or politics, but only about how to understand a stranger who speaks a different language and background from you, but also likes football. One of the speakers is Sarah, a 29-year-old Jordanian teacher. She said, "Many children know for the first time that their enemies also love their mothers and get nervous before exams. This is the power of education. It is not about indoctrination, but about igniting the fire of understanding." 7. The cost of peace, neglected psychological trauma. Although the ceasefire has brought physical silence, many psychological scars will slowly appear in the next few years. A newly established psychological support hotline in Gaza receives more than 1,000 calls every day. Many children still dream of bombs at night, and some people instinctively dodge the sound of airplanes. A psychologist said, "We have lost too much childhood and it cannot be rebuilt." In Israel's border towns, a large number of teenagers also have symptoms such as anxiety, rage, and auditory hallucinations. War leaves behind not only ruins, but also an intergenerational trauma inheritance. This is why the significance of the ceasefire is far more than just stopping the gunfire, but a psychological and emotional reconnection. The power of cross-border hugs, subtle changes between people. What is most moving is often not official statements, but behavioral changes between people. On May 5, a photo went viral online. In the picture, an Israeli border doctor treats a Palestinian girl's shrapnel wound. The girl cried and said, "I'm afraid you are here to catch me." The doctor replied, "I'm here to make you no longer afraid." This is not a publicity photo, nor is it a press conference material. It was secretly taken by a volunteer. This photo has received millions of likes because it makes people believe that even after 70 years of hostility, tenderness can start again. 9. The price of peace is also the seed of hope. Peace is not free. It requires courage, concessions, and even misunderstandings. But the seeds it sows will bloom one day. On the southern border of Lebanon, there is a teacher named Hassan. On the second day of the ceasefire, he reopened the classroom that had been closed for 2 years. The first sentence he said to the students was, "Today we are not learning the history of war, we are learning why peace is so rare." And the first lesson on his blackboard was to write 5 words: listen, understand, respect, cooperate, and hope. 10. The ceasefire in 2025 is not the end, but the prologue. No one is naive enough to believe that this ceasefire is the beginning of permanent peace. The root causes of the conflict are still complex, and the political struggle is still fierce. But what is different from the past is that this time, someone started to record the names of children from neighboring countries. This time, someone put aside hatred for 3 days and repaired the school roof. This time, someone told us, hope is no longer just a word in poetry. Part 2: How Peace Penetrates Scars, the Change of Destiny begins with a ceasefire agreement. In the early morning of May 6, 2025, a Gaza child opened his eyes. There was no explosion in his ears, no exclamation from his parents, only the sound of steam from the pot lid on his mother's stove. His name is Ahmed, and he is only 11 years old. On this day, he can finally carry his school bag, not to escape, but to go to school he has not seen for a long time. The beginning of peace is not always vigorous. It is often hidden in the cracks of life, like sunlight shining into the cracks of the ruins, quietly changing destiny. One children can finally hear their own laughter. Hani Youni's primary school in southern Gaza once became a wartime shelter. There are temporary beds in the classroom, and "Keep quiet" is written on the blackboard. But in the first week after the ceasefire, the children came back. One after another. Teacher Suhaila wiped the dust off the podium and said with red eyes, "I almost forgot the feeling of teaching." Ahmed and his friends sat in a corner chattering about one thing: where is their football? Is the old ball hidden in the air raid shelter still there? When the football was found, the children rushed out of the classroom and ran to the dilapidated playground. The ball rolled, they screamed and ran, as if the entire city burning with war disappeared from them for a short time. The interruption of a semester was reversed by a ceasefire. The incompleteness of a childhood was quietly repaired by a peace. According to data from the United Nations Children's Fund, in the conflict in Gaza in 2024 alone, about 3,200 schools were damaged or occupied as shelters. After May 2025, under the coordination of Qatar and Egypt, the first batch of international education aid materials has entered Gaza, focusing on preparing for the restoration of temporary classrooms, stationery, and psychological counseling services. Education is not only the transmission of knowledge, but also the first step to rebuild trust and hope. 2. Reunion of hostage families, back to the kitchen table. Just as important as the children returning to the classroom is the reconstruction of the family. After October 2024, the border communities in southern Israel became the front line of Hamas attacks, and a large number of civilians were taken hostage. Among them was a pair of siblings, 23-year-old Afir and 16-year-old Adel, who were forced to separate for more than 200 days. On May 8, 2025, they reunited at Tel Aviv airport. The scene captured by the camera was tear-jerking. The mother hugged the child tightly and the father kept saying, "You are alive. It's good to be alive." Behind the release of the hostages were multiple rounds of private negotiations between former U.S. President Trump and the Qatari and Israeli governments. According to foreign media reports, the United States did not focus on military mediation this time, but turned to the humanitarian diplomacy strategy. Each batch of hostages released in exchange for the extension of the wartime humanitarian channel. Although this transaction is controversial, it has indeed saved the fate that was originally destined to be annihilated. We know it's not perfect, but as long as I can call my daughter Adele again, I am willing to forgive the world, said Afir's father. Within 48 hours after the ceasefire, a total of 67 Israeli civilians were exchanged and released with Palestinian women and teenagers detained in Gaza. Although there are still grievances between the two sides for many families, the price of this peace is worth it. 3. The streets began to have colors. Graffiti artists in Gaza. Gaza was filled with dust during the war, and almost all walls were covered with bullet holes. However, after the ceasefire, some young people spontaneously took up spray paint and paintbrushes, turning bullet holes into eyes and broken walls into stories. 20-year-old Mohammed is a street art enthusiast. He used red and blue to paint an olive tree with a dove of peace on the wall. He said, "I have picked up stones, but the brush is more powerful." These young people have not received systematic art education. Their paintings are rough, direct, but deeply touching. Every painting is their prayer to the war, to fate, and even to God. They don't understand what the Vienna Convention is, nor do they know the symbolic significance of Trump's visit, but they understand one thing. If they don't spread peace today, they may not have a chance to speak tomorrow. A report by UNESCO pointed out that within 6 months after the war, the degree of recovery of cultural expression and artistic creation often indicates the possibility of long-term peace. The young people in Gaza have verified this in their own way. 4. The old lady selling flowers on the border. The tentacles of peace have not only extended into the war zone, but also spread to the border residents who have been in fear for a long time. In Sderot, Israel, a community flower shop that used to close at 6 p.m. actually opened until 10 p.m. on May 12. The proprietress Amira said, "For a long time, no one dared to come out after dinner. I almost forgot that my roses were bought." During the war, she made a living by selling plastic flowers and scented candles. People no longer got married, dated, or celebrated. Her real flowers could not be sold and all withered in the refrigerator. Now, as the Israeli army withdraws from part of the Gaza border, there is no artillery fire at night, and young couples finally dare to walk hand in hand in the night market. Amira restocked and put out baskets of carnations and violets. They say peace is the result of high-level negotiations, but for me, it is someone willing to buy flowers. The meaning of peace has never been abstract. It is reflected in whether you can buy bread again, sleep through the night, send your children to school, and even more in whether an old lady can make a living by selling flowers. 5. Global youth are learning peace in a new way. Although this ceasefire took place in the Middle East, its impact is extending to youth classrooms around the world. In The Hague, the Netherlands, a middle school arranged a model United Nations conference on May 10 with the theme of 2025 Gaza Ceasefire and Future Roadmap. Emma, 14, simulated a Qatari diplomat, and Lucas, 15, played an Israeli security advisor. They used data, cases, and emotional statements to strive for a glimmer of peace for a fictional world. "I thought it was too far away from me, but I looked up the information and found that a ceasefire could save a girl of my age," Emma said. High schools in more than 12 countries around the world have included this incident in their curriculum, including France, India, Canada, etc. Peace education is no longer just talk, but guiding young people to truly participate in simulated diplomacy, community dialogue, and even launching online petitions to ask their governments to pay more attention to peace solutions. In his speech on May 12, 2025, UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres mentioned, "This generation of young people will use mobile phones as weapons and knowledge as shields to open up new battlefields for peace." VI Trump's mediation, bringing results in controversy. Former President Trump's visit to the Middle East has caused widespread controversy. His approach is the same as always: direct, commercial, and sometimes with a strong personal mark. But it is undeniable that he facilitated a key exchange agreement between Hamas, Qatar, and Israel. According to Reuters, he said in a closed-door meeting with Hamas representatives in Qatar, "We don't want you to sign the big character posters. As long as you release people, we will send food." This sentence sounds simple and crude, but the list of materials for the humanitarian corridor was soon finalized on the spot. Scholars criticized him for undermining diplomatic procedures but also admitted, "This guy doesn't understand norms, but he knows how to trade." His role may not be written into textbooks, but at this moment he facilitated a compromise that could not be achieved through traditional means. In this deadlocked world, sometimes strange people can bring hope in strange ways. Part III, the spread of peace, new culture, and new awakening from the Middle East to the world. The ceasefire is not the end, but the prologue. The ceasefire agreement in May 2025, like a sudden warm current, quickly penetrated every corner of the world. It not only saved lives but also inspired unprecedented attention to the culture of peace. A ceasefire is reshaping the international strategic landscape, igniting educational reforms, driving scientific and technological innovation, and quietly awakening the long-lost human community consciousness. 1. The war map of the Middle East is being redrawn. Once upon a time, Middle East was almost equivalent to conflict, refugees, oil prices, and sanctions in international news. But after May 2025, major think tanks and intelligence agencies began to rethink the core proposition of regional security and future investment. The concept of peace corridor was first proposed. Representatives from the United Arab Emirates, Qatar, Israel, and Egypt held a closed-door meeting in Dubai on May 20, 2025, and put forward an unprecedented idea to build a Middle East peace corridor to connect the culture, technology, and youth cooperation axis from the eastern coast of the Mediterranean to the Persian Gulf. Although this is still a preliminary idea, it has extraordinary symbolic significance. The Middle East is finally trying to turn from a battlefield into a bridge. The idea includes not only proposals for regional visa exemption, but also proposals for youth exchange projects, energy sharing plans, and the establishment of a cross-border digital entrepreneurship incubation center. A Qatari diplomatic advisor said at the meeting, "We can finally put the words Middle East diplomacy and future in the same sentence." Iran's wait-and-see and adjustment. It is worth noting that Iran, which has always been regarded as a troublemaker by the West, chose silence instead of fierce condemnation this time, according to an analysis by a professor at the Department of International Relations at the University of Tehran. Iran is also tired. It has built influence through proxy wars in the past decade, and now finds itself facing a crisis of economic and youth out of control. A rare new voice has emerged in Iran. Peace may be our opportunity to become the protagonist of the region again. This does not mean that Iran will give up its position, but at least it shows that it has begun to realize that war is no longer the most effective way to play the game. On May 28, 2025, Iran's national television broadcast a special program called Post-War Middle East for the first time, interviewing Israeli scholars, Arab human rights workers, and American youth. Although it still has a strong ideological color, the broadcast of this program is an unprecedented gesture signal. 2. The Peace Awakening movement of global youth is taking shape. In Barcelona, 16-year-old high school student Lucia and her classmates launched a social media challenge called Peace is Trending. Each person uploaded a 30-second video telling the story of if a war suddenly broke out in your country, what would you be most afraid of losing? The activity quickly spread on TikTok. In just 7 days, the number of videos uploaded worldwide exceeded 1.8 million. Some people said, "I'm afraid of losing the food cooked by my grandma." Someone wrote, "I'm afraid I can't play football with my friends anymore." Someone quietly put down a family photo, didn't speak, just cried. This kind of real and simple content forms a sharp contrast with the heroic battle narratives that were popular in the past. It is the attitude change of this generation of young people. No longer regard war as a romantic fantasy, but peace as the ideal of the times. Youth influence policymaking. On May 26, 2025, the Youth Committee of the Canadian Parliament formally submitted a draft proposal on establishing a special fund for Middle East peace research to the Parliament, which received cross-party support. The Draft proposes to establish a 3-year fund of 50 million Canadian dollars to support Canadian universities and universities in the Middle East to jointly conduct peace research, psychological trauma repair, and cross-cultural education exchanges. MIT and Stanford University in the United States, Tel Aviv University in Israel, and Khalifa University in the United Arab Emirates have launched joint course programs, focusing on new disciplines such as peace design, crisis ethics, and anti-hate language engineering in the digital age. We are no longer just training engineers and economists, but future peace architects. This is the summary of a course designer at Stanford. 3. Technology and peace. A new combination is emerging. Peace is not achieved through negotiations alone. It also needs technology as a supporting force. After the ceasefire in the Middle East in 2025, a number of new peace tech projects quickly emerged in the global technology circle. AI intervention in fake news, from incitement to identification. In war, information warfare has never been absent. Since October 2024, fake videos, incitement pictures, and rumors on social platforms have caused great harm and even directly triggered violent incidents. After peace came, technology companies also began to reflect on their own roles. TruthWatch, an Israeli startup, has teamed up with the Technical Institute of Munich in Germany to develop a plugin that can identify deep-fake video content within 5 seconds and will be open to the public for free in early May 2025. Within a few days, the number of downloads exceeded 5 million. War creates fear and false information creates hatred. Peace requires tools and shields, TruthWatch CEO said at the product launch conference. Psychological reconstruction app. In hospitals in Gaza and Israel, a multilingual psychological assistance app called Inner Peace has quietly become popular. It combines meditation exercises, breathing training, emotional diaries, and remote psychologist appointment function to help war survivors adjust themselves. In less than a month, the number of users of this app exceeded 500,000, and many users left messages. I can finally sleep at night without explosions. Peace technology is becoming a new unicorn investment track. In 2025, 12 such startups around the world have completed round of financing, and some have entered the procurement system of the United Nations and the Red Cross. IV, the revival of religious dialogue and cultural healing. After a long period of conflict, the ceasefire in 2025 also aroused people's rethinking of faith and reconciliation. Joint statement of religious leaders from 3 holy cities. On June 1, 2025, a Jewish rabbi from Jerusalem, an imam from Ramallah, and a Christian bishop jointly issued a statement of 3 questions for peace. Should we continue to let our children recite hateful sentences? Does our God really want us to hurt each other like this? If we are all praying for peace, who is stopping it? The full text of this statement is only 327 words, but it quickly spread to millions of people and became one of the most infectious texts of peace culture in 2025. It is not a law and is not binding, but it has been repeatedly quoted on social platforms, copied, worn, and even made into jewelry, as if peace is no longer just a treaty but a belief to be carried with you. The steps of cultural healing. Yav Sharon, a famous Israeli director, announced that he will work with Palestinian playwright Maha Jara to shoot a film, Above the Border, which tells a fictional story about an Israeli soldier and a Gaza youth who opened fire due to misunderstanding and then saved a child together. The film is scheduled to premiere at the Cannes Film Festival in 2026 and has been jointly invested by France, Germany, and the United Arab Emirates. Art is becoming an outlet for post-war trauma. Countless books, short plays, documentaries, and animated shorts have sprung up like mushrooms after rain. They no longer talk about who is right or wrong, but how to continue. The future of peace, more complicated than miracles. but more worthwhile. Some critics say that the ceasefire in 2025 is just a thin agreement that may break at any time. This is true. Peace is fragile and peace is complicated. But if we look back at history, we will find that every great change starts from impossible. Who would have thought that in May 2025, Palestinian youth and Israeli volunteers would build tent hospitals together in the ruins? Who would have thought that Iranian and Israeli scholars would discuss post-war trauma education at the same academic conference? Who would have thought that a child who had fled would eventually become a poet who tells about peace because he went to school on the day of the ceasefire? Peace is not a final decision but a collection of countless people's persistence, forgiveness, waiting, and reconstruction. It does not have a dramatic explosion point but has a calm and profound power. It is worth everyone's participation. Ending, you and I are the possibility of peace. This ceasefire is not just a date in history, it is a choice of whether we can take different steps towards the future. It is a choice of whether we can let our children grow up in a gentler world. It is whether we are willing to believe that even if we have been scarred, human beings can still hold hands again. Peace is not a gift from God but a choice of people. You are also part of the choice. You did a great job today. Thank you for watching 365 English. Don't forget to like, leave a message, and comment. We look forward to seeing you in the next video.